I would usually say, like, if you're going to put a number on it, I would say like 3/4, 75% would be rowing. And then, you know what I mean? 25% would be like vertical, lat emphasis, whatever, because you're also going to get lat engagement on the rows too, right?
All of our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK for additional savings over there. I've been telling you guys, in case you didn't know, they literally have what I've seen to be the cheapest intra-workout carb powder available, Carbo Load. So if you're on a budget, if you're just getting through finals right now and you need to save your money, you can still use your intra-workout carbs by going through True Nutrition, getting Carbo Load, and using our code THINK. We're also brought to you by SupplementSource.ca. They've got great deals for Canadians that change week to week. And even with the Canadian mail shutdown, they're still shipping out through UPS and FedEx and DHL and all that stuff. Of course, we're brought to you by Patreon. Thank you guys for your support over at Patreon. We've got some Patreon questions that we're going to cover today. But first, we've got some training stuff that we were going to go over. We brought Big Nate Spear in for it. Nate, what's been going on with you, man?
Things have been going good. So I'm just in my off season now. I'm about like probably like full blown off season, like middle of the off season. So luckily, I've kept it a little bit tighter this year. So some of you guys that have been following along, I'm much tighter and leaner this off season and trying a different approach. Where last year, about this time, I was like 290, and right now I'm like 270. So much trying to take the leaner gaining approach. I think it'll be beneficial for me because of how long I've been training. So for me, you know, I've been training for now, or I've been competing for like 12, 13 years now. And I've done, you know, I have a lot of muscle maturity now. So I think staying a little bit leaner is going to benefit me a lot more at this point in my bodybuilding career, because I'm also 38. So it's going to make it easier too for prep, right? So you get a little bit older and it gets a lot harder, at least I've found for myself, to get in shape. So, you know, I think this way it'll make for a better prep, and one that I can like grow muscle while I'm prepping. So I think I'm sort of past the point of, you know, getting 30, 40 pounds heavy in the off season, you know, strip it down, you add 5-7 pounds, whatnot. So I think I'm at that point now. So I still obviously want to gain muscle. There's a lot of places I want to still improve, obviously. Like the big thing for me this year is my back and my hamstrings. So just that posterior chain, you know, just getting that more developed and more thicker and filled in, you know, like less gaps. So, but no, everything's been going good, man. Just, you know, coaching is going good, and I had a really successful year this year, and just looking forward to more. And like we were talking, your buddy Peyton, we're getting my YouTube going again too. So I'm excited about that. It's Nasty Nate Spear on YouTube. I already have like a good amount of videos, but like we were talking about earlier, it's hard to stay consistent. So there's been gaps where it's like, okay, I get a bunch of videos going, and then it's like, okay, maybe I'm quiet for, you know, a few months. So I'm trying to keep that consistency going on the YouTube channel. So with a guy like Peyton, it's really going to help, because I can do my own videos and then just send it to him, and he's going to put it all together. So be on the lookout for some more new YouTube videos. And yeah, I'm excited about that. There's Peyton as we speak.
Hell yeah. Peyton's hanging out with us, and he's been doing a bunch of our reels and the YouTube shorts and stuff. So if you guys have appreciated those shorts, because I've had people who are like, oh man, that was great, you guys can thank Peyton. So Skip, we've got some training stuff, and this is actually a client of mine. I didn't even know he was going to post it. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. He might have gotten a little bit blasted in the comments. He posted it up with the Facebook group, and we'll just throw it up here, and you guys can tell me what you think here. All right, let's see. Start here. Let's see, and we'll start.
Yes, this.
You saw these, all right?
Yeah.
I mean, great dude, hard trainer. We'll start with this one. Yeah, let's just mute that. There we go.
Okay, I tell you, the first thing I noticed with these, with his videos, is that gym kicks ass. That dungeon black, dirty floor, dust around the base of the equipment, scratches all over the equipment, metal plates, not rubber coated, crappy music in the background, poor acoustics. He's dressed literally like a homeless person. I love that. I love everything about it. Where is he? Just curious. Do you know?
It's over in I think it's Minnesota that he's in.
Okay, I'm not surprised. Midwest.
It's Minnesota or Wisconsin. I get those two states confused all the time.
Okay, if it's close to Milwaukee, that would be a place I'd be like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nate, you want to? I'll tell you what. Let me take this.
No, it is Wisconsin
first.
Now that I think about it a little bit more.
Is it?
Yeah, I just know that it's like past Chicago, and all of that area is the same to me. You know, we've got Detroit,
Milwaukee is
Chicago.
kind of the northern suburb of Chicago, but it's just in a different state. The taxes aren't as high.
Yeah.
Property taxes are, though. But anyway, I'll jump on this right away.
Well, you were going to give it to Nate, weren't you? You were about to give it to Nate.
I did, and I pulled it back. It's like, here, let me.
And then you took a half a breath.
Here, take it, Nate. Nope. Oh, I know you're getting ready to talk. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to honestly, I don't really see that much wrong in my opinion. I don't really see. I mean, he's short. He's stopping a little bit short, but honestly, I don't find anything too wrong with that because, like, yeah, it could. You want a deeper stretch, so I could see him going a little bit further and, like, you know, getting to touching the chest. Like, I'm a big fan of that because you're just getting that deeper stretch. I'm a big fan of, you know, that stretch. You know, training in that stretch position as deep as you can. But I don't really see. I mean, like, the tempo looks good and the reps look good. I don't really know. I missed out. I wasn't in the group and I didn't see that. So, like, sometimes I see these videos, but I didn't really see. Unless there's another video that's worse, but I don't really see, like, you go ahead, Skip, because I don't really see, like, that much wrong with it, honestly.
And I'm going to piggyback off that because I agree with you. I think the reps are pretty solid. Rep tempo, everything else. A couple guys commented that, matter of fact, the one guy said, and I'm going to try to quote it, too short or reps too short, sorry, 3 puke emojis with the green face.
Yeah.
That's not okay. They're not touching the chest, but that's part of what I wanted to touch on here. And the other guy who commented on it, because I'm that guy, and you guys probably do the same thing. As soon as someone comments and you don't necessarily agree, and you're like, I got it. Who is saying it? You go to see who you're dealing with, and I'm like, oh, decent physique, older guy, gets shredded, well developed. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Versus somebody who has 4 posts in their anime, or how do you say that? Anime. That Pikachu stuff. And it has nothing to do with training. You know what I mean? And you're like, you shouldn't be commenting. So I can see both sides. I used to be kind of I call it a touch and go type too, where I did want that full range. But I have found this. Take note that his arm, I don't know if he's tall, but his arms look long.
Yeah.
So, and he's got a relatively close grip.
He's a tall-ish guy. I believe he's like 5'10". So not super tall, but he's definitely not a short guy.
So longer arms with a relatively narrow grip. It's not narrow, but it's not wide. It's going to make, or potentially make, that bottom position, I don't want to say an overstretch, but it's going to be more difficult than, say, me, who has, I don't have T-Rex arms, but I don't have long arms either. With a little bit wider, I may be able to touch my chest. Here's the caveat. Where is this exercise in the sequence of his exercises? And this is why I say this. If he's opening with this exercise and his shoulders are bound up or they're tight and it hurts in the bottom position, I always tell my clients, never force the range of motion. If you can work into a better range of motion over time, cool. And people may argue, well, then he needs better flexibility. He may, but maybe he's working into that. Maybe he is now slowly moving that range of motion down. The other thing is this, and I'm not a very big guy, so I'm gonna hand this off to Nate and ask Nate if he has the same issue. Not being big myself, not being a huge dude, if I were to do inclines last and I'm pumped like crazy, that bar doesn't want to go as low because then it does feel like it's forced. So I'll keep it up a little higher. He's a little higher, but here's my thing on this. I'll finish with this. I don't think that depth is a huge negative. Yeah. Egregious. Thank you. Otherwise, I'd be like, oh, dude, bro, and I'd put puke emojis after it.
Yeah.
I don't think they're that short. And when in doubt, I think that keeping the bottom portion of a press out of it and not going as deep is a safer option without losing too much on the positive end of it as far as benefit. Cost to benefit, ROI type of thing. What do you think, Nate?
Well, I was going to say, So one thing I'd like to see is like a lot of guys, what happens is like, because that's heavy weight for him, you can tell it's like very heavy. So a lot of guys, like I want to see his warm up sets. Are they the same exact way as he's doing them now? Because then I would be fine with it. But a lot of guys, what happens is they start adding the weight, they get to their top set, and now the range of motion is less than what the warm up sets were.
Good point.
Which I'm a big person on that as far as like, if he's training that way specifically, who knows, that mind muscle connection could be great. Like we've all seen guys, obviously he's not like a genetic freak, but we've seen some of these genetic freaks where they train on a little bit lesser, shorter range of motion, but that works for them and they build adequate muscle because they know like that works for them. And also another point with that specific exercise is like if he has specific or like previous injuries at all, you know, that's something where I would have guys like benching specifically, hey, if I have shoulder issues, you know, or elbow issues or something like that, where I'm going to go a little bit shorter and not go as deep, you know what I mean? Because you're going to get in trouble, you know what I mean? And recreate some old injuries, you know? So if there's something, maybe he's babying or he has previous injuries, that's another thing too, is how people like
He's
stop
good.
a little bit.
Yeah, he's good. He's healthy.
One thing that I will give him props for is I really am a big believer and big on like the consistent reps and tempo is perfect. Like I really give him props on that. Like that speed is like up, down, up, down. It doesn't stop. It doesn't pause, you know, which I'm a really big believer on. So I think he's really getting a lot out of it. But like you said, yeah, the stretch could be a little deeper, but I don't know. I'm not going to throw like puke emojis or anything. Like it's not like that. You know what I mean? Like bad to me.
Sure.
What do you think, Scott?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, okay. So interestingly, so like I said, Jordan is a client of mine, and we started working together. I think that we started. You lose track of time, but I want to say it was about a year ago, and no, it was longer than that. It might even be 2 years now. Whatever the case, yeah, because we started working together. Right after a contest. It was right around the beginning of a year. And then we went straight into an off season. We grew and grew. And then we dieted down, did a contest. He did really good, as a matter of fact. We went to USA's, and in open, he got 7th place in his first attempt at a national level show. So, and there was a ton of guys there. I want to say there was like 20 guys in his class. So, you know, he was just like right outside of that top 6, and this was his first opportunity to stand next to those guys. Needs to bring up more size, and I'm going to show you something else. I bragged on him on one of the other podcasts. So at his all-time heaviest, when we got him up to about like, this was like 243 is where he was at when we, before we started cutting. Now then, so we went through the contest prep. After that, we spent a little bit of time, you know, filling back out. He did some international travel too. So we had like a couple weeks of downtime, no gear. We actually went from a high frequency training plan back to like a bro split for this downtime. So we kind of deloaded that frequency, and this is not, and just started reversing him up. And then check this out. So this picture is, he weighs the same in both of these pictures, 240, about 243, 243 in both pictures. The left one is at the absolute heaviest he had gotten in his off season. The right one is post contest, having filled back out, you know, completely, you know, clean at this point, and we're just getting it back into it, you know, to push hard at this point now. So I feel really good that we're already back up at his peak weight, and he hadn't even touched anything yet, you know.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
So I'll give him that credit. And then here's the thing. So I'm not a big fan, first of all, of the barbell bench press. I feel like I've seen a lot of guys get hurt with it. So it's I see that, and it's a little bit scary to me. We had worked on the dumbbell bench press, and I was like, hey, Jordan, can you send me one of your videos that, you know, and he's like, well, this was from a little while ago now. I'm not sure when, but he was like, here's one of my videos. So I wanted to play this for you guys to show you the range of motion he had used on this. And now we've worked together on the dumbbell. We've worked together on some of his back training too. And I just previewed looking at like the first rep or two of this, but you guys tell me what you think here. Let's see, cue it up a little further there.
Oh, that's a party in the back right there. Good for him.
Now look at that depth.
Yeah, that looks great. Yeah.
I like
and,
this
and a lower
better.
incline angle too.
Yeah.
I'm glad you noted that, Scott, because I did want to add, but I'd already been,
I love the
verbose.
tempo too. It's just great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, the rhythm, very rhythmic. They all look the
So,
same,
why
and
can't
that's
he do that on the barbell opposed to dumbbell? I don't see why it would change. Like for me, if I do it on the dumbbell, it's like the same on the incline. It's not going to make a difference. Like you know what I'm saying?
I
Like, why
wonder.
wouldn't he?
Was it the weight? Maybe was it that
Oh,
it was? You know what I'm saying? Was it just that it was so much heavier on the
Heavy.
barbells? Yeah,
Even though
I
he
haven't
kept
talked to
the-
him about it yet.
Even though he kept the tempo, it's still you could tell it was heavy in his hands, right? Like you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like when he picked it up, you're like, oh yeah, that's heavy for him.
Yeah.
And you know what? A 315-pound, relatively high incline. I mean, look, that's a decent incline press. So I think that people tend to, especially the average gym goers, they versus say like pros and that sort of thing, they tend to focus on those milestone
Right.
weights on the bar. The 225, that was a big deal to get to when I was in high school. 315 on the incline's decent. 405. So we may tend to be pushing as a group that like those weights when maybe we should be 30 or 40 pounds lighter. I'm not saying that he should be. I'm saying it's certainly possible. There's a lot of people listening, including myself. We've all done it, where that number is important, especially if you're going to take a video and everybody's going to see it.
Yeah.
All
right.
I always train hard with the cameras on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Make more noise when the camera's on.
Let's pick at him some more here now. I've he kind of volunteered for this. He kind of didn't. He posted it in the group over at Facebook, and so that's why we're using his videos. But here's the next one. Here we're going into some back training. I'll be curious to hear what you guys have to say about it. And like I said, we hadn't talked about any of these, and we're just starting to get back into a groove with talking about training again, going into his off season. Back is something he brought up tremendously. It was really one of our main focuses during that whole last off season. And sorry for everybody at home on audio. I guess this isn't making for the best audio content. I do encourage you guys to check out the YouTube video. There we go.
That is a long T-bar pole. Is it not?
What do you
It's
mean?
almost like it's just that plate is out there.
It goes out like 6 feet.
lever.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the lever arm is out there.
yeah.
And which is funny because it was like the first thing I noticed, which is kind of bizarre.
Could it be also the angle? You know what I mean? Because his legs look like they're about 10 feet long, too.
Yeah, but if you just look where the handle attaches, and I understand, I think it's a good move for one because you don't have to load a ton of plates. It obviously makes it heavier the longer the lever is, or not the longer the lever, but the length of the lever versus where the handle, where you're actually pulling from. Yeah, and some people may not. What is he talking about?
I mean, I like those a lot because he's got like what he's doing is he's like letting that scap go on the negative, right? So all the way down, releasing, which I'm a big fan of, like releasing that scap, getting that stretch. Then as he's coming up, he's getting those elbows back. He's contracting the back hard. I mean, the only thing I could say is he could probably retract the scap a little bit harder on the way up, or maybe like use the chest and the shoulders a little bit more too. Because a lot of people think drive the elbows back and they forget like you can also like use your shoulders and your chest and get an even greater, harder contraction. You know what I mean? But otherwise, I mean, it looks pretty solid to me for a chest supported T-bar row. You can't really mess that up too much, you know?
Yeah.
I've seen it. Point.
And I think the big mistake I've seen some people make is that they don't let it go deep enough. They're doing kind of like, they don't let the elbow bend, or the elbow continues to bend at the bottom, and they're only doing like the top half of the rep. Let me ask you guys this, because this is something I just saw from another guy recently. He's really lifting, somebody else that I'm working with, really lifting his chest off the pad at the top. And you can tell that there's some like lumbar action that's helping to create momentum versus, I mean, like Jordan here, he's keeping his chest really pretty much pinned to the pad. That's kind of keeping the tension in the muscle we want. The other guy now, on the other hand, he was using twice as many plates. And I know that if I told him, I was like, man, keep your chest pinned to that pad, he'd probably have to cut it back down to 2 plates instead of 4. What do you think, though? Is there going to be some type of benefit to giving it, because the way I put it to him, I was like, you're kind of cheating it, but you're also moving twice as much weight.
Well, so I'm not honestly too against. I think there's a happy medium, right? So there's like you keep your chest 100% like the first guy, right, all the way on the pad. But then I think you can use a little bit, but you have to use enough where you're not, the chest isn't coming completely off, but you're like keeping the chest on, but you're also like you're using a little bit more of that over. What do you say, like over contraction, or like you're you know what I mean? You're almost like what you said. You're like lifting the chest up a little bit, but you're keeping it on the pad. And like there's a happy medium of like both guys, and then meet in the middle. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And I think it matters too. And this one's going to be hard to explain. It matters based on the relationship of the angle of the pad versus the angle of the pull of the lever. Okay, some machines,
right? They're not all weird equal.
Right, they're not synced. So that I know I have found myself on some padded T-bar rows. I'll almost need to lift off a little further, and other ones then I can stay a little bit more flat. It just depends if those two angles are in sync. You get what I'm saying? The angle of the pad versus like if you have the angle of the pad and the angle of pull is the same. Okay, cool. But let's say it's not. The angle, they're different. Then I'm going to want to change that. It's not something I consciously think about. It's something, like you guys do after training for so long. It's a feel type of thing. It's also where you are on whether you're high on that pad, low on that pad. That can change too. Whether you change handles, because some handles are, the neutral handles sometimes are higher than the regular, or the bent. I think he was using the bent, which quite frankly I like. That's a preference issue more than anything. But the slight bend I think is just better than the straight. But that's just a feel issue.
I will say though, because we're on the subject, like just because back is honestly, in my opinion, the hardest muscle group to grow, especially if you don't have it. It's so difficult. So I think a lot of guys, what happens is they do go too heavy, and that's when their back doesn't grow. So I think for me, like my back really responded when I lightened up the weight and I started getting like really perfect reps, perfect stretch, perfect contraction, and really stopped using any other muscle groups. And I'm not like the guy that's like, there's some guys that are way too isolated, you can't use any other muscle group. I'm not that guy, because I do believe in like using other muscle groups is fine, because it's going to develop overall everything. You know what I mean? Like some guys on the rear delts, they're like, oh, you have to be so perfect, but it's like, that's okay. You're going to get a little bit more trap, and that's fine. A lot of us need more like mid trap. So, but on back specifically, I am picky as far as like very minimal momentum. So on a barbell row, for example, like I do two plates and a quarter, where I used to do 4 plates. I could row that shit, but like my back wasn't growing, right? So I lightened up the load and I used the barbell row like I'm a machine. Like I'm not moving at all, like no hip movement, no swinging, no swaying, no using that momentum. And my back grew a lot more. So I think for back specifically, the more you can keep everything locked in and just use that back only and pull with your back, like they used to say back in the day, you know what I'm saying? I think you're going to get way more developed in that way. So I would almost prefer the first guy's video as far as how he was doing it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of guys do for back. They always, I'm a picky guy as far as like a lot of guys on that negative, they just sort of let it go, right? And they don't really like feel that stretch and pull on the muscle. Like for me on back,
100%.
Like, I let that back recruit the weight on the way down and the load, and like that, it feels it, you know what I mean? And that pull and that stretch. Way too many guys do like a 1 second negative and they're just like boom, you know what I'm saying? Whereas me, you're getting slower, like a 3 second negative, and letting the muscle recruit on that negative,
Yep. Think protraction, retraction at the heaviest weights you can get both throughout the set. You still want to train heavy, but if you're not getting full protraction and full retraction, I think you're really selling yourself short. And you can go to the extreme, just like you say, you could, I don't think holding reps at the top of a T-bar or a barbell row is necessarily a great idea. Yet it might be a stimulus that if you used every now and then, it would be a nice, change of pace. But by and large, the vast majority of the time, if you can focus on full protraction, full retraction, with the most amount of weight you can use to be able to still accomplish that, I think you're going to get a lot further with back development than seeing how many plates you can hang from your belt while you're doing, chins or heavy barbell rows. And there are always exceptions. So if anybody's listening, they go, Dusty Henshaw, Dusty Henshaw, I'm not going to go to Dusty and go, bruh, you're doing them wrong.
Hey, Dusty's the first one to tell you too. Don't do what he does. You know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's a good example of what works for you. And this is the whole thing too, that anybody listening, we're giving advice, we're giving guidelines. I just said this to a client the other day. I'm not giving you instruction. I'm giving you guidelines, because there are always going to be exceptions. And you may be that person that grows incredibly well from Dusty Henshaw rows. Yeah. But the vast majority of us probably aren't going to.
Yeah.
All right. Got a couple more here. We'll just breeze through these. These look really good to me. And like I said, so last offseason, we worked a ton together on specifically back training. I like the technique he's using here. And I see previewing you at a head while you guys were talking. I watched this. This was a rest pause here. And one of the things we were really trying to work on this past year had been, I'm putting my hand up in air quotes for our audio listeners, is low lats. I know people will be like, there is no low lat. It's all the lat, But I guarantee you that if you can pull the way he's pulling, like low right now, like I always say, like basically pull to the groin, elbows in tight. He's doing everything that I asked him to do here. So this is, I guess, more of a brag, this particular video, than a critique. I like everything he's doing with this.
For people watching at home, that I'm noticing that is a really good that he's doing is you can see his elbows are running very, very low, almost against his quads.
Yeah.
So that makes it a lot harder too. So that's like one of those things where you might have to lay in the way a little bit, but you're going to feel it way more in those lower lats, like you said. Like, so driving that elbow almost against the quad, whereas a lot of guys keep it a little bit higher, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where the strongest at. But you're getting way more of that lat recruitment. See how he's driving that elbow down and back? Yeah. That's like beautiful. And another big pet peeve of mine on back training is guys that do this seated cable row. They overextend. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, you're honestly not getting what you think you're getting out of that stretch, air quote. You know what I mean? Like, they're over accentuating that stretch almost, like, and they're coming forward. It's like, honestly, I think people lose that tension, if anything, when they come that far. Like, you know what I'm saying? When people over exaggerate that lat stretch on the cable row and they come
absolutely
forward so far. Yeah.
You could kind of use it as like a momentum again on your way back. And for anybody watching this was a rest pause. That's the reason he was stopping. He was giving it a 20-second break in between each mini set, basically. You got anything on this one, Skip?
Yeah, dude. I think it's important to note that an over-emphasized stretch on a long pulley row, even if you're not using momentum, you're creating a vulnerability in the lower back with the SI and everything. You'll get away with it when you're made of rubber in your 20s and maybe even into your early 30s, but you're creating over time a very likely issue, and it's just not a good idea. Now, if you're using like an opener and you're warming up and you're doing something like Justin Harris does, where you're kind of using a rope or something like that to warm up your lower back and you're doing light weights just to get blood in there, cool. But if it's one of your, I don't say prime exercises, but one of the exercises that's important for hypertrophy during your actual back session, I think it's a really bad idea. And I agree with you, Scott. I think that the form, and I think Nate probably agrees too, that long pulley row form is pretty solid right there. I think they look pretty good. Let me add one thing just before I forget, because I do this. I think it's important to note in your head, especially when it's a more narrow grip that is a neutral grip while you're doing long pulley rows, is to kind of visualize that because it's a good cue, that you're dragging your arms along your sides or along your lats. That will help you. It'll cue you to keep the elbows tight versus letting them flare at all. And especially if you are trying to hit the lats much more than the mid back. And you can do long pulley rows very well, depending on, again, the angle, where that pulley sits in relation to the seat. You can use that exercise for a mid-back exercise, or you can shift down to the lats, a little bit more by pulling low, depending on that angle.
So actually, I had a question for you guys real quick. So not a lot of people talk about this, but I noticed because he was doing a rest pause on that exercise, I don't see a lot of guys, and I can see why, and I don't, honestly, but use intensifiers for back specifically, because I do think it's hard because it does create that fatigue in the biceps and the forearms, you know what I'm saying? Like let's say a drop set, you don't see a lot of guys do like drop sets or a rest pause on back stuff, right? Like, would you guys think it's good or bad, or what's your thoughts on like intensifiers on back stuff? Because you said, you know what I mean? We use it a lot on legs, we use it a lot on chest, or even arms, you know, drop sets, rest pauses, that kind of stuff, where I don't see a lot of it getting done for back specifically, you know what I'm saying?
I think it could be a great concept, provided the mechanics are tight.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, is your lower back, the stability of your lower back, giving out before the muscles that you're training? And if that's the case, then it's not a great idea. Here's a superset that I would give you a good example. And I know we're talking about drop sets or anything else. I would be far more likely to do a superset of, say, something that is chest supported, and then go straight into a long pulley row, because then the lower back is fresh for the extension of that set, or for the intensifier. That way, the stabilizers, you know, your erectors, they're not fatigued continuing that set and putting yourself again in a vulnerable position. There's always risk. I mean, we all know that the harder, the more intensity, the heavier the weights, we all take those risks, but we still want to minimize them as much as possible too, because you can be growing like crazy from all this high intensity stuff, but if you injure yourself, it's 3 steps back.
Yeah. I'd say I hadn't really thought about that, Nate, that about the rest pause stuff on back, because honestly, we had been doing it since forever. Training with Shelby and following John Meadows' training plans. Like when John sent us his stuff over, it was all like there were so many different, you know, real hard intensifiers, rest pauses, you know, stuff like that, that it just was kind of like the norm. And so that's generally, I usually tell people to do rest pause too. There's things that it doesn't translate well to, like you could do it on a dumbbell row, but I prefer to do it on a machine, you know?
Right. That makes sense.
And what's he training the next day? Is he going to come in and pull deads? Is he going to do RDLs because he's got a hamstring day the following day? Is he going to squat? I mean, there are factors, you know, too. There's quite a few factors that need to be, and this is part of programming. It's part of advanced and optimal programming. Is it's not what you're doing that day. It's what you did the day before, 2 days before, and what you're doing the next day too.
I think we were onto something that, because we did like a push pull legs or variation of where it might be like push pull legs upper lower type thing for like a whole year, and then through his contest prep he continued doing that. I think we were onto something too with the beginning of the off season, going to the bro split, because it's like, you know, is as great of progress as I've seen people make going to high frequency. I think one of the reasons they make such great progress is because they had low frequency previously. You know what I mean? And so we tapped that out for like a year straight. And I think it was beneficial. It was like 8-12 weeks that we went back to the bro split. And it allows you to just like really freaking annihilate a muscle for, you know, just bury it into the ground and then give yourself an entire week to recover from it, versus like, oh, I got to be back in 2 days or 3 days, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's why, I mean, it's never like, you never should be married to any specific training setup, you know what I mean, or whatever. Because like I'll do like you just said, it's perfect because like I'll train for 4 days a week, you know what I mean, and then I'll also do like, you know, 6 days a week. So I'll go back and forth, and really it's like periodization of like that volume, right? So you're almost like, you know, you're doing your volume in like sequences or something, you know what I mean? So you're like high volume, then bring it down to low, maybe moderate. You know, and I also right now I'm doing a 2 on 1 off, which I really like a lot, and getting good response there. But I think too many people are married to a certain training program or split. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, I always do it this way or that way. It's like, dude, you know what I mean? Like, you got to tap into like all situations. In my opinion, what do you guys think? Like you were saying, it's good to like mix it up. You know, and obviously it goes with like how that person's recovery is, where they are, like they in prep, off season, what's their body weight, what's their sleep like, you know what I mean? All those. Like you were saying, when it comes to training and programming, It's like you got to take all those into account, right?
Well, I think that the veteran's kryptonite, or the nemesis, or whatever you want to call it, is the more you train, the more experience you have, the more likely you are to be locked into what you feel works, feels good, has always worked, that sort of thing. I had to laugh. I switched up my split for the first time, and I went back and I really thought about it. I was on a plane ride back from Vegas for 4.5 hours and no Wi-Fi. and got to thinking, you just got plenty of time with your thoughts. Matter of fact, so much I started working on my issues, which was scary. But anyway, I know.
God forbid.
So, yeah, I don't want to start thinking about other things. It has been years since not only I've done this current split, but that I have gotten away from the split because it just has always worked. And it hasn't been, 2 weeks back, I think, and all of a sudden I'm like, I literally picked up the dumbbells for dumbbell presses 2 days ago, and my wife laughed because she heard me say, apparently out loud, holy shit, these feel light, at like the third or fourth rep. And that's not something, it's just the recovery, because I changed from a slightly higher volume and less frequency to a little bit higher frequency but a lower volume. And I'm on a TRT phase right now, and they just felt light. And then I grabbed the next one, and I'm like, oh my God. And the recovery is so much better, yet I'm training more frequently, but there's a lower volume. And why? Because my body is not familiar. It's a different stimulus in the sense that same volume isn't there. I actually have to hold back. So I think as veterans, we tend to do that more. The younger, or I don't want to say newbies, but the people who've been in, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, they still sometimes fight. They want to change. They don't have that patience kind of isn't there. And and I say we as the veteran group, we tend to slam them for that. No, sit on it longer. Yes, sit on it longer, but don't sit on it forever like most veterans do. And, it's difficult for us after, with the experience we have to get out of and get away from those things that have worked for so long. And that goes with everything. It doesn't just go with training sequence or split. It also goes with exercises. There are exercises I've come back to years later that I had shelved. Like, that just hurts. It messes with my shoulder. It doesn't feel right. Come back to those exercises at some point and warm up with them and try them out. Use those exercises and experiment a little bit during your deload or cruise weeks, where you're not in there to just hammer everything and leave them smoking, so to speak, when you leave the gym. That'll give you an opportunity to feel out different exercises that you haven't before, and you may come back to something that didn't work in the past but could be very helpful and productive 5 years later, 3 years later, 10 years later.
Hey, I got another training question that came up while we were talking here, so I figured I'll toss this one up. What do you guys think about the amount of volume one should allocate to horizontal versus vertical pulls for back development?
I mean, it's going to depend on the person and what they're trying to develop, you know what I mean? Because obviously, like for me, for instance, now I'm doing way more vertical than horizontal movements at the moment, but before, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's not necessarily like, it really depends on where you're at in that moment. But for me, I will say this, I always start with my vertical movements first, because I find it's easier to get the mind muscle connection to, let's say, a pull down or a pull over, or even a one arm pull down, whereas like, let's say I have it at the end of my exercise, end of my like back day, like, or exercise selection per se, I'm way too fatigued at that point, and I find it's much harder to connect with that muscle. Whereas like, let's say doing a row or a horizontal movement, there's not much muscle connection or mind muscle connection that needs to be taking place, right? It's like you row and you contract and it's very easy. Whereas I'll say connecting to the lats or teres, it's a much more of a process, and it's much harder to get that connection, right? So I'll say like that, like I always try to have that stuff in the beginning, opposed to like rows I'll have at the end, because of that fatigue factor and the mind muscle connection starting to dwindle through the workouts, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. That teres it's funny. It's really, really important, but it fatigues very quickly too.
Mm-hmm.
So I am more of a fan of getting that work done early, and quite frankly, having it be plenty warm before the arguably heavier weights or the more intense stuff comes in. If I have to put a number, and this is just to make my point, so it is arbitrary in that sense, I would tell the vast majority of people, and especially the listeners, because of the demographic, we're trying to get, and I put myself in there too, we're trying to get size. Nate, you've got pretty good size. So you're starting to kind of, I don't want to say tweak, but you're starting to go, oh, I've got this size, and I'd really like to be where you are one day. I figure I've got 40 years in. It's going to happen eventually, right? I mean, come on, throw me a bone. To get to the point where I'm like, okay, this size is pretty good. I need to refine and move. Okay, I need a little more lat development. I say the vast majority of people always give rowing the horizontal movements
Already.
more attention than the vertical. And I understand that this can happen too. You can get to the point where your back is so good that when you do need to come back, and this happens a lot, people row so much. And, Manny, my client that was 212, his back was really good, but his lats were weak. And you'll find that a lot when there are years of heavy rowing and you get a good back and then you're like, my lats aren't as developed. But I will argue this. I don't think lat development is as important in the overall back scheme of things when it comes to back musculature as it is having just a thick, wide upper back. Get that first, and then almost look at the lat development as kind of a refinement, if you will, because you can get that size quicker. Because then what happens is you end up with a Gaspari back, and this isn't a shot at Gaspari. That shot of his back double bicep when he had that sweat-soaked leather belt on was on my refrigerator as a teenager. So to the point where my mom, it drove her crazy. She saw that as very low brow, but I had to keep it there. You become, yes, you have that detail and you have that lat development, but if it overpowers your upper back, then that's just not a good look. And we've seen it. I see it a lot with new trainers, young kids. And I say it's because I think this isn't helping either. The one arm lat, you got to get in touch with your lats, and you have to do that. And that's why every skinny kid is doing one arm pulley, from their knee. It's just like, dude, bang, row, get in there and row, get in there and bang.
I was looking for that picture.
I was saying the same thing as I would usually say. Like, if you're gonna put a number on it, I would say like 3/4, 75%. Would be rowing, and then 25% would be like vertical lat emphasis, whatever, because you're also going to get lat engagement on the rows too, right? So what I like is you start with let's say for example I do 2 lat movements or whatever, vertical movements, and then when I get to my rows, my lats are already engaged and pumped up, so it's going to get a better connection on those rows. You know what I mean? Obviously it's more like your thickness of the back, middle back, this kind of stuff, but like you do get some good lat engagement, especially if you know how to train too. At this point, like we were saying, you slow down those negatives and you get a good lat engagement on like a row. Like for me, I like Smith barbell rows right now. So like on that negative, I do feel it in my lats. So it's pretty good that way, so you do get, that's why I would say 3/4, 75% would be rows, because you are still getting that lat. Like a row is gonna hit the overall back pretty much, right? Where like lower back too, like all that kind of stuff. Whereas, maybe a one arm pull down, you're really just isolating that lat. Whereas say a barbell row, you're really hitting everything top to bottom, essentially. You know what I mean? For the most part. Yeah. So.
When you do your Smith rows, I'm curious, do you like the straight up and down old school Cybex Smith, or do you like the angled?
I love the 15 straight up and down old school thin bar Cybex. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Isn't that the best Smith machine ever made?
You like the angle one on rows, or?
I like it. It's different, and that's cool. But if I have to pick one Smith machine, the Cybex straight up and down old school is the best Smith machine ever made.
You can't beat it. It's good.
Yep.
Is this the picture you were talking about, Skip? I was hunting around because I was like, I want to see this. Is this the one that was on your fridge when you were a kid?
That's the one.
Oh man, that
was iconic. It's iconic to me because look at it, how grainy it is.
Look at that, Nate.
That's crazy.
Got the 1980 shorts that on the front, they had it was a World Gym emblem on the one side.
Look at those veins on his right forearm. Yeah. Look at that forearm, man.
He changed the game. And he never won, but he always challenged with the condition. It was Haney size, Gaspari condition, and it was a good time. And my thing was, I knew at that young age, I was never going to be huge, but I'm like, I think that's why he struck a chord with me right away. And he was young. So I thought, I'll just get peeled. I'll just focus on condition.
Yeah.
He was the first one with like striated glutes too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some people will say
it was, right? Yeah. Some people say it was Munzer and everything. And Munzer was in crazy condition too. But Munzer didn't threaten. He didn't come out of the amateur ranks and threaten those top spots at the Olympia, or that top spot at the Olympia right away.
I was going to say, though, what's interesting is looking at that picture is how many good backs there were back then. And I think this is where we get away from a lot of guys not using barbells and dumbbells. Because I do think does make a difference in density and thickness to the back, where you see a lot of guys with weak backs these days because we have all these machines and a lot of people get married to the easy stuff, right? It's easy to just be like, well, why am I going to do a barbell row when I can do this prime, seated, fancy, plate loaded row or whatever, right? Where I do think it does make a difference on barbells and dumbbells because there's a different gravity there. Like let's say a one arm row or a barbell row, you're getting that gravity that almost like feels harder and it's like pulling on that back harder. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like your back is more work. I just feel like, on some barbells and dumbbell stuff. But I think a lot of guys coming up, it's very crucial for them to train with the barbells and dumbbells, especially for back, because I do think it creates a different kind of density and thickness. Like if you look at Samir Banu, he still has one of the best backs ever, and he's from the 80s. You know what I'm saying? So the physiques haven't gotten that much better, just bigger, essentially, right?
Yeah, I think that I tell you, I say this as quick as I can. I think that the machines are beneficial, hugely beneficial, but at the same time, when you're doing free weight rowing, you have so much, and this isn't the best way to explain it, so someone could pick me apart on this. You have more stabilizer work being done when you have to balance things out. Even doing, say, double dumbbell rows, both dumbbells at the same time, versus, say, like a machine row. That's, to me, a day and night difference, and you can see that in the amount of weight that you use. Try to do double dumbbell rows and see how big those dumbbells go. They're not going to go as big as you want them to be. And what I mean by stabilizer work is not biceps or rear delts as much, but the combination of everything having to work together to keep everything even versus a machine that's fixed. Even if it's isolateral, it's still fixed. So it's more targeted on that specific angle. You can't move out of that specific angle unless you move your body.
Yeah.
From being pressed against the pad. So it's a big, and then you do remove quite a bit of erector work in there as well, and that's taking up a lot of space, a lot of muscularity on your back. That it's still being worked to stabilize, but nowhere near to the degree that when you're actually in a bent over position or a long pulley row position.
That's what I was gonna say too, and chime in real quick is just make it quick. But the lower back development I feel like is missing these days because a lot of guys aren't using barbell row, like free weight, even a barbell row or even a one arm dumbbell row. Your lower back is pretty well developed just from stabilizing that movement, right? And like bracing. You know what I'm saying? Whereas, like, I think a lot of machines, if you did machines all the time, you'd probably have no lower back unless you trained it directly, obviously. But, like,
and maybe that's why the classic guys don't have a mid-back or waist thickness issue. This is a rabbit hole. I mean, there's a lot there. But I tell you this, if I was a classic guy and I wanted to keep my waist and my hips and everything else as small as possible, I don't know if I'd be barbell rowing either. I'd jump all over all that back equipment that we have available now.
I'll tell you what, too, Kuba is a really big fan of machines. Number one, he has a crazy gym, from what I hear. His gym has got, like, every machine is packed into that place. But I think part of it, too, is his influence from Jordan is, like, super high progressive overload, and that you can load a machine up and just pull an absurd amount of sheer weight that you may not be able to do with a free weight. Sometimes it's a limitation, like Dusty doesn't do a lot of dumbbell rows because the weights don't go heavy enough. You know what I mean? So he'll use a machine. Or at home, I have guys who train at home and they can't do dumbbell rows. So I'll have them do like a landmine Meadows row. Somebody just mentioned in the comments too, underrated landmine one arm barbell row. That's a tough one. Yeah.
And there's so many variations you can do with that too. Like, I used to do those for a lot of years, actually. So, and I wouldn't even do them as a Meadows row. I'd take a D-grip handle and put it around, you know what I mean, where like the top of the barbell is, and use the D-grip handle as my, handle to row.
Oh, yeah.
Row with the T-bar, and it was amazing. It would light the fucking shit out of my back, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And people like Jordan, and then let's go to like older school HIIT, they were all into like what's his name, Menser, Nautilus. They were all into that stuff. So I think there is that element, but I think I'm with you guys that I think the foundation goes back to the free weights, and that's not where Jordan started. that's not where Menser started. They built a lot of muscle, you know, or even where Kuba started, you know, but then they refined themselves and pushed to absolute absurd limits, you know.
They do. I mean, for me, obviously, like you were saying, I mean, I'm 250 like on stage, you know, so I'm pretty well muscular developed at this point. Like I don't really need much more size. But when I was coming up, I deadlifted a lot, and a lot of guys forget that, you know, we only talk about what we're currently doing, right? So a lot of times it gets skipped over, and people are like, "Oh, well, that's what Nick Walker's doing, or that's what the big guy is doing." But it's like, well, he for 5 years before that, he was doing deadlifts and barbell rows. You know what I mean? So
right,
part of that base or density thickness that we already had was from those movements. So I think a lot of new guys get it mixed up, and they see, "Oh, well, Nick's doing a one-arm pull down, whatever isolation. That's what I'm going to do." And it's like, well, he also did all this other stuff before, you know, that or whatever.
I like the 75-25 rule. I think when people start out, and remember, I mean, I have a few years. I'm not a pro, but I do have a few years of training. And looking back, one of the things that I've come up with is the 75-25 rule, and that is in the very beginning, if you're just starting out, I think 75% of your weight training should be free weight, dumbbells, barbells. That will help to build a foundation. It'll help to build strength. It'll help to just build size right out of the gates, because you typically grow a lot anyway when you first start. Over time, that ratio changes. It won't change from it won't completely flip the 75-25, but over time, it adjusts to the point where now that I'm closing in on the end of my healthy years of training before I, you know, my bones get brittle and I have a walker with tennis balls on it, it's a 25-75, where 75% of my training is more involved with more fixed plane or machine type exercises, with 25% of it being, you know, free weights, dumbbells, and barbells. And I think that's a natural progression. It's a safety issue over time. Obviously, you know, you'll develop lower back issues. When you first start out, you need stabilizer strength, because if you start getting really strong on machines, you're not going to have stabilizer strength. So if you're pressing on machines and you all of a sudden decide that you want to jump on the bench press or do dumbbell presses will probably look like crap for someone starting out if they didn't do them for a couple of years and they were only on machines, because there is that balancing and coordination component. You have to build those neurological pathways, that coordination of being able to do complex movements that you have to balance. Overhead push press with dumbbells while standing, things like that are great for people who are just starting out. But the thought, it makes me laugh, the thought of Nate going into the gym tomorrow and trying to do dumbbell push presses overhead because of the amount of strength that you have would be, I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but I'm pretty sure it'd be a challenge, you know, right out of the gate to try to balance those weights, you know, those big weights over your head.
Well, I was going to say, I did want to chime in before we move on, but about free weights versus machine, I think in the beginning, too, if you guys agree with me or not, but I think it teaches us a lot about intensity and like doing the hard stuff. You know what I'm saying? So let's say you started out just doing machines. I feel like that doesn't build that character, like that hard, you know what I mean, that you have to go through in the beginning, that teaches us, oh, this is how you turn it on, and this is how you train like a hard ass MFer. You know what I mean? Where, you know, free weights, machines, it's like, you don't really get that. Like if you just started training on all machines, I feel like it's just very hard and humbling, like a barbell row, a deadlift, a squat, a shoulder press, even. Like you're really fighting to get those reps, and it's teaching you intensity, you know, for down the road. Like you're like, okay, I know how to tap into that now because of like
where's
barbells
the fear? Where's the fear in failing on a machine? You're not going to get buried under a weight. Fear is underrated. You need to learn what that feels like when you go down in a squat and you don't know if you're coming out. For us, it's different. We know how to bail. But for someone who's new to it, that can be very scary. And you have to have that challenge of this just could crush me. Like this could go really bad.
What an amazing feeling.
It is.
Hey, I got something, guys, to wrap this particular episode up. This is one from Patreon. Going to take a complete left turn here. And this is something I'm going to ask everybody on all the shows. I asked Dave earlier on a most recent recording of drugs and stuff. Best ways to overcome self-doubt.
Oh, man.
Well, very apropos, based on the conversation we had before we pushed the button.
Yeah, for you, Skip.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, you know what, Nate, take it first. Let me get my thoughts together.
Hey, Bailey. My crazy dog over there now. Bailey. What I was gonna say, sorry, my dog is that 10, 15 pound dog, what I was gonna say though is I think for self doubt, because I'm like that too. I've never been a very overly confident person. I've never been like I'm the guy that's gonna win the show. I think for me it's just like keep showing up. You know what I mean? And just like keep working hard and just don't. The biggest thing is just stay out of your mind the best you can. So like occupy your thoughts or try to also. I mean, it sounds sort of corny, but honestly, I mean, me and Scott have talked about this in the past, but even like some daily reflections, you know what I mean? Like, what am I grateful for? How can I stay positive? You know, like thinking about those kind of optimistic thoughts. Because if you can stay optimistic, then most likely you're not going to go to that self-doubt kind of area. You know, so I think any way you can stay optimistic and positive and look at sort of like the good part of stuff, have perspective is going to help you steer away from that self doubt, if you will. I mean, that's sort of really that's a hard subject, man. That's like deep, you know. I wasn't prepared.
Yeah, it is. It kind of
And then Skip forced you to go first, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of put him. This is easier said than done. I think we'd all agree on that. I'll say, I'll say this: the best thing you can do, I think, is, and I'm trying to take my own advice, is to number one, fuck what everybody else thinks. That's
Right.
probably the most important thing, but that is very difficult to do, and arguably worse in this age than it was 20 years ago before social media, because everyone will pick you apart. But I think more importantly, and this is one of the things that I'm trying to do, and I'm working very hard on this, is to try to gauge or put more emphasis on the work that you're doing and the effort involved versus the outcome or potential outcome. I think if I and more people focused more on the work that we're doing and the focus and the like the time involved and the dedication to and effort and all that is your payoff, because ultimately if you're putting in if you're focused on those things, those are things you have control over versus the outcome. Nate doesn't know who's going to show up to a show. Nate doesn't know what his competitors are going to look like, the condition that they're going to be in, what they've dealt with to get to that point. He can only control the variables that he has control over himself as far as the condition, whether he does the work, whether he puts in there. And sometimes, unfortunately, it needs to be said, you can do everything right and you can work harder than everybody standing next to you and you don't win. Sure. You don't come out on top. So you have to be, as humans, we have to be good with what we've put in. The worst thing you can do is not do the work. Yeah. The worst thing you can do is not, either do the diet, not do the training, not be consistent, because then you have to, in the end, you've helped to cause. You basically just didn't give that 100%. You didn't have everything invested into it. And I think that would be, I know this is just from a competitor standpoint, but it would be very, very difficult. I tell clients this all the time. The worst thing you can do as a competitor is have to stand on stage and have the thought go through your head that I didn't do everything I could have done. That's a horrible feeling versus getting beaten or know that you're going to get beaten, but you're standing on stage going, I did everything I could possibly do. I gave it everything I had. That's a whole lot better feeling than I went on vacation. I blew off my diet because, I had to do this or I had to do that. You can do that, but you have to be good with the outcome.
Well, you actually,
I like that.
I feel like you hit it right on the head when you said one thing, and that's social media. So self-doubt is stay away from social media is the best thing you can do. Because even for me, like I'll just use for specific examples is in prep, it's so easy to look at other competitors. So, and then what happens when you have other competitors? Self-doubt, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, fuck, I'm not as shredded as this guy. I don't have as much quads as this guy. I don't have, my glutes don't look like this.
And you might actually be better. We're so hard on ourselves that's not always the case too.
So often.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, if you can limit yourself from social media usage, a lot of people have done it and they become more positive and they have a better outlook on life because they've limited their social media usage. So a lot of this shit, because this day and age, it is what it is, but especially with bodybuilding, everything is social media driven, right? So it's like, you got to stay away, have limited social media time. Try not to, like, if you're getting ready for a show, like I've muted people before just because it's best for my own internal being. And that's what matters. So whether someone goes, oh, you're weak or, oh, this and that. Well, at the end of the day, I'm by myself in my own house and that makes me feel better. So that's all that matters. Right.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, getting past the point of like, oh, what are people going to think? And like, we all have that, right? All of us have it to a little bit more different degrees, but like, that's the biggest thing I've found for myself is like coaching, for instance, and like advertising ourselves, right? It's like we have this thing in our head where we're like, oh my God, like what are people going to think? Like I'm pushing this coaching thing and like people are judging me. You know what I mean? Like that whole like, or like you're trying to push product or something. It's like, you don't want to be that guy. That's like self-doubt, right? You know what I mean?
Oh,
So
yeah.
getting rid of other people's, because the people you talk to that are older, a lot of people, it's like the best part about getting older is you start to care less what people think, right? So that's where you want to be as far as
Yeah, no, usually,
usually.
But it is. I tell you what, it's difficult being in the industry, and Nate, I'm sure you can relate to this. It's difficult being in the industry and known for what you do because you're more under the microscope with social media because of your position in the industry versus if you were nobody. I think the stress is far lower. You know, I go back 20 years to where no one really knew who I was. I didn't have anything, you know, any real, what I want to say, either reputation or wasn't known in the industry. No one cared.
Sure.
So now and that's part of the reason I keep quiet or try to keep quiet when I, say I want to compete. I don't want to be under the microscope. It's part of the reason I train with 4 other people in the gym at a gym that I'm not going to be distracted from, or that no one's going to want to know what I'm doing or care.
I got one to add.
It's easy.
I got one to add. And I didn't mention this when I asked Dave. I just asked Dave and then we closed the show. This is something that I mentioned to somebody recently, and I could probably use to occasionally do this again in the future. I tell this one to guys that are in contest prep. So bear with me for a minute. I remember there was this movie called Memento. I don't know if you guys remember that. Guy would wake up every day and his memory would be just completely wiped. So he didn't know where he was, didn't know who he was, didn't even know his name. But he started like piecing it together after a while. And he started like writing down notes. He'd write like a Post-it note to himself. And then the next day when he woke up, he started collecting these Post-it notes and he was like piecing it together. So I feel like when I think of self-doubt, that means I probably initially thought to myself, this was a good idea. Because I can think of times in my life where I've been like, this is a really good idea. I would love to do this. And it's not until after I've had that idea that then the self-doubt creeps in, Maybe it's instantly. Maybe it's like, no, I would look so stupid if I did that. Or maybe it's down the road. And every time I had ever done a contest prep, there was always a point when I questioned myself. Every single time. And I recognized that time was going to happen. And it's almost like, and I kind of learned this from when I was younger. I dealt with like a lot of depression and stuff. And I would almost kind of take a Post-it note before the show. Think about that perspective of where I'm at. Think about what my goals are. Think about what I want to do. And kind of like write a note to my future self, basically. Because down the road, my perspective, when it's in that darker place, I want to remind myself. And it's like, our whole perspective can change. Like with me, I mentioned depression. They say that when we're depressed, we are more likely to remember the down times. Think about it too. Like when you're happy, you remember the happy times. When you're happy, you don't remember like the saddest day of your life. You look back at like the good times. So if you start getting down on yourself, then you're like, oh, this won't work. I failed so many times before. This time. It's like, write that note to yourself to remind yourself of what you really want, and remind yourself that like maybe this is just a temporary hole. You're in the trench of this experience right now, So anyway, that was my thought.
when you look for yellow cars, you'll see yellow cars. That has always stuck with me. Doesn't matter if everything is going great or everything is going bad. We tend to pile on either way. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good, and I think people should know listening. I'm going to say it, and I know that some people listening will disagree. But in their heart of hearts, when they're having that conversation with the ceiling fan at night, that I always talk about, because those are the true conversations with yourself. I think every single person on the planet has self-doubt and doubts himself at some point. You may be more confident on the surface. I understand there are some people who are more confident than others. There are times where I'm more confident and have been, or I go through phases. Okay. But everybody deals with self-doubt. So that means if you're just starting out, or you're 5 years in and you don't think you're very big and you think it's easy being Nate has to deal with, it's not exactly the same thing, but there's parallels. There's still that self-doubt. And not just with physique and competing, but it could arguably be relationships. It could be financially. It could be business decisions, things like that. So we all deal with it. At 54, coming up on 55, I sometimes ask myself, I don't remember having this much doubt when I was younger, but I was also sidetracked with raising 4 kids, building a business. Exactly. And the more time you're in your head, like on a trip home from Vegas when you don't have Wi-Fi, you start to dig into those places with really not even consciously. Right. And you start thinking about things that you're like, I have not thought about this before. Like I don't have the time to slow down in the lives that we live to really sit there with your thoughts. And sometimes it can be kind of a negative situation. So stay busy. Don't deal with your shit. Just stay busy.
That makes sense.
Nate, we appreciate you spending some time with us, man. It's great to catch up and hear a little bit about your off season and stuff. So you said you're hanging it like in the 270s now, and you're not planning on taking it.
Whoa. Heavy. I don't want to correct both of you, but you're not hanging and you don't weigh. You're sitting at 270 or 260. You're sitting at.
Wait, we're sitting. So we're sitting at 270 right now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Weigh, exactly.
Yeah, no, things are going good, and just appetite's good. I'm honestly, it's nice because I don't feel like overly full. Like, most off seasons, I just ate food, and I'm like at that point of like eating 6,000, 5,500 calories, just feeling like I'm done with it, where I feel like much more positive and happier in this off season because I'm not pushing myself to like that super extreme heavy weight and whatnot. And my training has been actually really awesome because of it, because my pumps are still insane. My mind muscle connection is really good. My mobility is really good because I'm lighter. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So when I was at that heavy weight, it was like, it's like I'm super strong, but it's like I don't move as well either. You know what I'm saying? So like, when you're like 40 pounds above stage weight, you're like, you know what I mean? You're just not as mobile, and it's definitely made a difference in my training. So I'm really happy there. So like the training has been really phenomenal. I feel just as strong too as I did at 290, which is a positive too, like, because I'm still pressing the same weight as I was last off season. So I'm like, okay, that's definitely a good thing, because if I'm doing a leaner off season, I definitely want to make sure my strength and my performance is still what it is at my heaviest weight. You know what I'm saying? So
sure.
I think John Jewett actually was saying that like whatever, like the perfect body fat percentage for you in the off season is almost like where you perform at your best and your strongest. So maybe like, someone might at 15%, that's where I needed to go to be the strongest. Or someone like me, maybe I'm at 10% and I'm still just as strong. That's a good spot for me to be, because my strength and my performance is still at its peak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
but
cool,
I
man.
definitely think though, I had to do that in the beginning of years, get heavy, you know what I mean? And like, like most of us have to do that, you know what I mean? Like to get to a certain point, and then we can do like the lean gain and stuff like that as you get a little bit older and stuff, or more mature and like become a veteran,
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing the way it works out for you, man. And I'm sure that I'll tell you what, whenever I had gotten less heavy or people I've worked with, it's usually you end up pretty freaking peeled too, going into the next contest.
And also, like I was going to say, like speaking of back stuff a lot during this episode, I actually did. So there should be a new back workout coming out on my YouTube with Peyton. So I think next week, hopefully, he'll put that together, and I have a lot of good tips and cues in there too, like we were talking about. So I think if anyone wants a little bit more bonus, you know what I mean, they check that out, and it should be good. It's at Nasty Nate Spear on YouTube. So
excellent. I'll be sure to link your YouTube in the description too. So if you guys aren't already subscribed, definitely head over. And I'm looking forward to seeing you ramping up on your content too, man. Let's get this thing rolling.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. I feel motivated too. So, and I'm a good spot, like off season wise. And I'm, like I said, that's the thing too, is like when you're 290, you're so lethargic too, like, or you're like that heavy, you're like, I don't want to do this content. I don't want to do anything. You just sort of go and train, and then you're like, I just want to sleep all day.
Yeah.
You know, so having a little bit more energy has been nice throughout my off season, you know.
Hell yeah. Guys, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you hanging with us. Leave us questions for the next episode. You can go to teamskip.com to reach out to Skip. And Nate, what's the best way to reach out to you for coaching?
Just my Instagram. It's at Nate Spear, just my name. So, yeah.
I'll link that below then for sure as well. And go to McNallyDiets@gmail.com to reach out to me, guys. Thank you for hanging with us, as I mentioned. You're welcome to post up more training critique stuff over in the Think Big Facebook group. We'd be happy to play it and talk about it and troll you and destroy your life and all. No, we'd be happy to talk about it. Yeah, exactly. We'll send you a puke emoji. Skip will personally. And check out TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there, supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. And thank you everybody from Patreon. Guys, we've got a slew of questions for the next episode that Skip and I will be knocking out. For another episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear, we will see you soon.